Part 71. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 711. Walking out of the airport, it was still the same parking lot, and Subai experienced a feeling called things are different and people are different. I still remember the last time I flew back to Shanghai from Dali. Fatty came to pick him up, but he encountered the trick of ghosts seeking revenge, which directly led to Fatty moving out from Laofang's house. This time in Guangzhou, Qiaozi was picked up by Qiaozi. I picked it myself. As soon as he thought about it, Subai felt a little sorry for the fat man. Generally speaking, the fat man must have calculated something through cause and effect to deliberately separate from himself and others, but in the end he still couldn't escape. After getting in the taxi, it took less than 20 minutes to drive to the door of Laofang's house. It is really close to Pudong Airport. You can get off the airport expressway and turn a corner. As soon as Subai got off the car, the iron door was pushed open, and Gyatso, who was wearing all black, walked out. When he saw Subai, Gyatso couldn't laugh or cry. "I really didn't expect you to come back today." Immediately, Gyatso seemed to notice something and clapped his hands. "So fast." Obviously, Lord Buddha saw that Subai had been promoted to a high-level audience. In the past few months when Subai and Fatty were away, the two monks did not feel very lonely living at home. They could even be described as enjoying themselves. Generally speaking, monks with their qualifications, even if they did not become an audience, at least there is no problem in becoming an eminent monk, so I am mentally and spiritually prepared to worship the Buddha with a blue lantern for the rest of my life. The monk has gone to Nantung. There is a Buddhist church there, Gyatso said as he handed Subai a glass of water. "What about you?" Subai was sitting on the sofa. He hadn't been back for a while, but there was no little one and no luck at home, which always made people feel empty. "I was just going to go out and relax," Gyatso explained casually. Subai didn't pay attention to what Buddha was going to do when he went out at night, and directly spread his hands and said, "Just go and do whatever you want to do, I'm not a guest." "You are back, I have to talk to you." Gyatso also sat down. "Besides, you are an adult now." Subai smiled and pointed at Gyatso. This guy still wanted to know something about the senior audience from his own mouth. After all, the Buddha was very close to being promoted to the senior audience. The two old men were sitting on the sofa chatting. Subai was talking and Buddha was listening. After explaining the entire promotion process, Buddha also sighed. "It's also hard for Fatty." Yes, if the incident in Guangzhou were taken out and treated as a separate story, Fatty would undoubtedly be an absolutely tragic character in the story. The choice of forgetting each other until the end of the world is more like the heroine leaving freely in a martial arts story. The background, it should be paired with the sunset at dusk. "My promotion is actually a bit tricky," Subai said. "There are no tricks or tricks. Everyone takes a different path." Gyatso seemed to suddenly think of something and asked, "By the way, I brought the ancient corpse and put it in your room. Now go, do you want to take a look?" "Put it in my room." Subai couldn't help but nodded, and he and Gyatso left the living room and came to his room. Originally, Subai had expected a decaying coffin to be placed there, but who would have known that what caught his eye was an ice coffin? It was not made of thousands of years of ice. It was what ordinary families would rent when someone passed away. The kind of coffin that can be plugged in to keep the temperature low. "This looks really bad," Subai joked. Ancient corpses and antiques sometimes go hand in hand. The Lulan ancient corpses that are most familiar to the public were once the favorite category of criminals at home and abroad. Whether it is the British Museum or the Louvre, there are also many mummies from Egypt preserved. There is a movie called Phantom of the Louvre, which tells a story like this. But just like the principle of a good horse with a good saddle, if you want to make a precious antique more valuable, then naturally the silk cloth it is wrapped in and the box it is placed in cannot be bad, just as a fine ancient corpse will not beg you. There are complete funerary objects, but at least one matching coffin is required. It is indeed a bit too cheap to directly place the ancient corpse in the plug-in coffin in the funeral parlor like Gyatso. I'm not selling it to you, I'm giving it to you. Why should I mess around with you? Seeing that Sudbai's attention was actually focused on this, Gyatso was a little bit dumbfounded. Originally, when it was delivered, it came with the mouthful that was over 800 years old. It was a coffin, but something happened during transportation, so the coffin was gone. With that said, Gyatso walked to the ice coffin, reached out and tore off the talisman papers one by one. You should see for yourself first. Even if the rest is useless, the corpse energy that has been maintained in his body for nearly 1,000 years should still be good for you. Of course, I hope you can get more benefits. In this way, he is considered valuable. Aren't you afraid that the Cultural Relics Bureau will investigate you if you do this? Sudbai also stood in front of the ice coffin and began to look at the ancient corpse. Is it possible that this thing can be used as an exhibit in the temple in the future? Gyatso shook his head. This thing has to be reset every 10 years. The living Buddhas of this temple have regarded him as a burden, but there's no way to get rid of it. You have good teeth, so you'd be doing me a favor by getting rid of it. Am I that cold-blooded? Oh, it's still a female corpse. The clothes she wore were those she changed into later, right? Yes, Gyatso didn't intend to hide it from Sudbai. It's hard to determine the age of the ancient corpse. After all, the temple is not an archaeological institute, and we don't have that much time to study this. 800 years ago, she seemed to have caused a stir. Some troubles occurred, and he was sealed by that living Buddha and brought back to the temple to suppress him until now. Sudbai pressed the button and then opened the lid. For a moment, the temperature in the entire room suddenly dropped, and even frost residue appeared. This effect was no worse than the power of ice condensed by himself. How come the resentment is so strong? Sudbai asked, a little puzzled. This is the result of so many years of resolution, and the resentment has been reduced a lot. Sudbai placed his palm on the forehead of the female corpse. The female corpse was generally well preserved, but naturally it did not have the same feeling as a living person like in zombie movies. The skin was still a little shriveled, and the complexion also showed a greenish-black color. No matter what he looked like when he was alive, he now has a hateful appearance. Ordinary people may be frightened and fall ill after just one look at him. When the palm of his hand was placed on the forehead of the female corpse, Sudbai's right eye began to show a dark black color, and the zombie bloodline in his body began to operate independently. Same kind can communicate with each other, just as humans also believe that other animals also have their own language and communication methods, but they have not yet been able to crack it. Sudbai remembered that he had also tried it in the story world of Mr. Zombie before. You can communicate with other zombies, but it is far less complicated than communicating with people. The mainstream of communication between zombie groups is that high-level or intelligent zombies can guide low-level zombies, similar to the ants in the ant tribe. Subsequent status relationship. However, when Sudbai tried to release his own induction, he received no response from the other party at all. This made Sudbai a little strange. Could it be that this ancient corpse is really just an ancient corpse, nothing special at all? But this is impossible. Didn't Lord Buddha just say that there was an accident during transportation? If she was really just a simple ancient corpse, how could there be an accident? When Sudbai took his hand away and looked at Gyatso behind him to ask, he suddenly found that Gyatso's face had turned into a woman's face. Woman. Staring at myself. The surrounding background also turned into black from Sudbai's room inadvertently. Ah! Sudbai couldn't help but smile. Hey, I thought the transmission signal was not good before, but it turned out that the signal was so strong that it almost caused severe radiation. Gyatso's body began to slowly disappear and turned into a woman's body. The woman was wearing a purple skirt and stood coldly in front of Sudbai. Subai knew that he was now in a mental space that he and the female corpse had built together. It was a communication area formed by the female corpse's response after Subai released his own induction. "Hello," Subai greeted with a smile. The female corpse still stared at Subai coldly and said nothing, but there was a look of contempt in her eyes, as if she was looking at a second person. "There is nothing that can be done about it?" Now that Subai is a senior audience member, he really doesn't panic when facing this female corpse. There is no need to panic. You must know that Gyatso himself can completely suppress this female corpse. Then I have nothing to worry about. Even if I specialize in magic, now I can completely crush them in the most unreasonable way, and the effect will not be worse than the talismans and formations. I need your memory and your corpse energy. You took the initiative to sacrifice it to me. I can keep a piece of your consciousness and help you reincarnate, or I can help you find another body to use the corpse to resurrect. It's better for me to do it myself and break it into pieces. Your body and soul are forcibly absorbed. You choose." Subai touched his pocket and took out a cigarette. This cigarette was fake. Subai knew it, but for Subai, not to mention tobacco, even if he suffocated with ether, it would not have any impact on him. This is purely a matter of personal habits, but when Subai lit the lighter, he could not light a cigarette. He. Subai knew that the other party didn't want to smoke, so he couldn't light it. After all, this was a spiritual space established by both parties, and the other party also had the right to control it. The female corpse continued to look at Subai. Just when Subai felt that there was no point in waiting any longer, the woman suddenly nodded slightly and said at the same time, "Good. Then you agreed." Subai shrugged. "What should I do to cooperate with your sacrifice to me?" "Mate with me," the female corpse said. Subai. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 712. Subai was surprised and paused for a few seconds. He was confirming whether the female corpse was a joke, although Subai did not believe that an ancient corpse that had been suppressed by the temple's Buddhas for 800 years would make such a joke at this time. The female corpse was very taciturn and as cold as her body temperature, but soon, Subai also began to feel cold. Subai's coldness was due to his murderous intention. "I'm sorry." Subai still kept smiling, but you should be able to see the decisiveness in Subai's eyes. "Have you confirmed that you have been dead for so long, and you still have temperature inside and can still secrete water?" The female corpse continued to stare at Subai and said nothing. "I think we have nothing to talk about." Subai waved his hand, and everything here began to break. "Communication is over." The next moment, Subai opened his eyes. His hand was still on the forehead of the female corpse. The female corpse was still lying in the ice coffin. But at this time, the female corpse also slowly opened her eyes. There was despair in her eyes. "Black. Is there any result in the communication?" Buddha asked while looking at his mobile phone. It felt like he was guarding a friend who was going to the hospital. Then he turned around and asked, "Is it over?" The female corpse's eyes were open, and Subai also sensed that the other party wanted to get up, but as Subai exerted force with his palms, the female corpse was still suppressed by Subai and continued to lie in the ice coffin, unable to move. This is the crushing of strength, which will leave you speechless. After some friendly communication, she also made a nice request, but I still refused it for you. Refuse for me. Lord Fo put down his phone. He noticed the strange movement of the female corpse, but Subai is now a high-level audience. With him here, naturally there is no need to do anything by himself, even if Subai doesn't know how to restrain the ancient corpse. A simple and rough beating is enough. In addition, this is Lao Fang's house, and there is a magic circle that is difficult for senior listeners to spy on. Buddha is really not afraid of this ancient corpse jumping around. She said she had been in love with you for a long time when she was in the temple, and she needed to have sex with you before she was willing to hand over everything to be liberated from reincarnation. I originally thought you were a kind-hearted Buddha. If I had asked for your opinion in advance, you would probably have done it to save her. She sacrifices herself for righteousness and dedicates herself, so I will not make it difficult for you and directly help you reject her. Thank you. Gyatso naturally didn't believe Sudbai's nonsense, and just urged, "Are you hungry? I'm a little hungry. You should get rid of her early and we can go out for supper." After speaking, Buddha turned around and left the bedroom, and helped Sudbai close the bedroom door, as if Sudbai was really going to do something embarrassing. Sudbai let go of his hand, the female corpse immediately bounced up, and the surrounding temperature dropped again. Boom! There was a muffled sound, and Sudbai grabbed the female body by the neck and threw it to the ground. Boom! Hit the other side again. Boom! 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 At this time, Gyatso, who was sitting in the living room and planned to watch TV, only heard bursts of muffled noises, as if Sudbai was setting off kick firecrackers in the bedroom next door. Except for some furniture, the main body of this house is part of the formation. It is also made of the materials that Lao Fang worked so hard to find, so it is very strong. Therefore, even though Sudbai pinched the neck of the female corpse and violently messed it up, the floor tiles were not damaged at all. Smashing it here and there, the effect was still very obvious. Although the female corpse was not directly hit without any arms or legs, the temperature of the room finally returned to normal after being subjected to such a rough physical attack by Sudbai. This is not surprising. When a certain power reaches its extreme, it does have a universal effect. Sudbai let go of his hand. The female corpse was lying on the ground and did not get up again. There was black smoke curling around her body, and she was shriveled up than before, as if some otaku's girlfriend had leaked air. But at this moment, 2 lines of blood tears actually flowed out from the eyes of the female corpse. When the blood tears flowed out, they turned into red insects and began to fly. Ice. A layer of ice instantly appeared around the female corpse. After flying out, these red bugs froze to death when they hit the ice cover. They fell down one after another, and then turned into dust and dissipated. If it were in the past, Sudbai would probably have to put some effort into cleaning up this female corpse. It is even impossible for the female corpse to fight with Sudbai for so many rounds. But now, it is really difficult for her to make any splash in front of Sudbai. Some of the weird methods he possessed were killed by Sudbai before they could bear fruit. One foot stepped on the lower abdomen of the female corpse. Sudbai had 2 fangs exposed in his mouth, and the dark black color of his right eye became more and more intense. Coupled with his now purple hair, he showed a touch of monster temperament. The reason why Wang Ijuan was so disappointed in the hospital before was probably due to Sudbai's hairstyle, because normal people would think that someone with such bad taste who dyed his hair purple could be a rich young man. I'll give you another chance to choose. Sudbai looked at the female corpse with strange eyes. To be honest, although this female corpse was absolutely powerful and couldn't make any waves in front of him, Sudbai really didn't want to just swallow her up. In that case, he could only obtaining some zombie evil energy is just a dispensable thing for Sudbai, and it is unlikely to improve his zombie bloodline much. What Sudbai is more concerned about is the inheritance that may be obtained from the female corpse. In the last ancient zombie world, I obtained a lot of vampire inheritance, and now I am also thinking about whether I can get some zombie inheritance. After all, what I rely on the most is actually the 2 bloodlines of vampires and zombies. The female corpse has a cold expression and cold eyes from beginning to end. Now, Sudbai gave her a second chance to choose. The female corpse should have understood. But she still spread her legs silently. She was wearing a purple skirt, which was very convenient. Sudbai pursed his lips. Forget it, what he said was in vain. When Sudbai raised his foot and was about to step on it with all his strength, he found that a long yellow writhing shape crawled out between the legs of the female corpse. The object was greasy and looked like an eel. As the eel came out, there was a pop sound, and the body of the female corpse shriveled completely, and the skin began to decay rapidly. "Sir Chu, you are really busy. I invited you to dinner, but you forced me to have a midnight snack." Sooner peeled the shrimp and glanced at Chu Zhao, who had arrived late. Chu Zhao sat down opposite Sooner. This was a private restaurant that everyone often liked to come to. But the last time he came here, he brought his girlfriend Ziyawai with him. Subai was also there at that time. What happened next, needless to say, this time Sooner made an appointment with this place again, and Chu Zhao was stunned for a moment at first. "There was a murder case this morning. I went to deal with it. The problem is not big. The murderer has been found." Chu Zhao was not polite and started eating directly. As he ate, Chu Zhao looked around and said, "When you invited me here, I thought it was Dabai who was back. You have nothing to do to check the whereabouts of other people's air tickets. I just paid attention occasionally. He should have just got off the plane a few hours ago." Chu Zhao said. "We are no longer on the same level as him. Although I still regard him as a friend, there really won't be many opportunities to go out to eat and chat like this in the future." Sooner didn't mean much when he said this. The tombstones of the three of them had been bought and put together. After the last incident, the three of them had resolved their old feud and had a food stall together, but everyone knows that it is unrealistic to think that the three of them can continue to live as carelessly as before. Who knows, I have heard something. If someone of Subai's level is too good to us and helps us for no reason, it may cause the difficulty of our tasks in the next story world to be increased. Otherwise, any powerful person the audience can form a gang themselves. I've heard this before. By the way, I came to see you because I wanted to talk to you about something." Sooner wiped his hands with a wet wipe, then took out an envelope from his wallet and handed it to Chu Zhao. Chu Zhao swallowed what was in his mouth, picked up the envelope, opened it and asked, "What is it?" "You'll know when you see it." What was in the envelope was not a letter, but several photos. "Isn't this a group photo of the three of us having a barbecue?" Chu Zhao asked with some confusion. "Didn't you print it out and give me a copy before?" "Look carefully," Sooner reminded. Hearing this, Chu Zhao lowered his head again and read patiently. Then, Chu Zhao's mouth began to open slowly. "This is... You see, don't be so boring as to say it's mine." Chu Zhao shook his head. "But what's going on? A supernatural photo? No way, it couldn't be a supernatural photo. I took it with my mobile phone, and I can tell you that I printed out a lot of them before. Apart from the ones I gave to you two, I still have quite a few left. I took them out specially to take a look. Now, everything has become like this, and I'm sure the photo at your home has also become like this. Then why is this happening? Who is this guy?" Chu Zhao thought this was really ridiculous. "Her hand is still on my shoulder. Pay attention to this key point." Sooner reached out and tapped on the photo. "I was actually a little surprised at the time. Why, when I took a photo with you and Dabai on my phone, your face was so close to Dabai. There is obviously a lot of space at the end. When I first printed it, I thought it was because you don't take selfies very often, but now it seems to be easy to explain, because behind you, there is a woman, and she actually joined us. Take a selfie and her arm is naturally hooked around your shoulder." "Who is this woman?" Chu Zhao asked. "You should ask why we cooperated so well with her when we took selfies. It was as if the four of us really knew each other and were sitting there taking selfies together. The angle I held the phone at, your posture, the side of Dabai's head location, this is obviously a selfie taken by four people who know each other together. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 713. Subai bent down, stretched out his hand and pinched what looked like an eel in his hand. This thing was thicker and larger than the ordinary eel, but it was smoother and felt more like a sponge. They were all greasy, as if they had just been soaked in lard. Moreover, Subai couldn't find a mouth or any mouth parts. This thing was completely sealed. It had no head, no face, no legs, no feet. If you couldn't feel it squirming when you hold it in your hand, it wouldn't make people think it was a living creature. From time to time, there was a sizzling sound in the palm, like water being poured into a boiling oil pan. However, if you look carefully with a magnifying glass, you can see that there is actually a gap between Subai's palm and the eel. There was only an insignificant distance, and the maintenance of this distance prevented the corrosive liquid naturally secreted from the eel from causing any real harm to Subai. This is the ability of an advanced listener. When you become an advanced listener, your bloodline and absolute power do not actually increase. What is improved is just your life level. However, the chain reaction is huge, and it is reflected in many details. If it is not for your current Subai had absolute confidence in his strength, so he wouldn't just grab the eel with his hands. Lord Buddha, Lord Buddha! Subai shouted outside. What's wrong? Gyatso asked as he walked over. Supper is here, will you cook or shall I? Subai teased. Hey, Gyatso looked at the thing in Subai's hand and said with some surprise, this is a corpse fetus. Corpse fetus? Subai shook the greasy thing in his hand. Can this look like a corpse fetus? Haha, Gyatso smiled. He wanted to reach out and take a look, but when he got closer, he felt the corrosive liquid secreted from the eel-like thing, so he gave up. He knew that Subai could catch it with his bare hands. It was because the other party had this confidence, and Gyatso also noticed the details of Subai's palm. Although there was only an insignificant distance between them, most of the most direct corrosive power could be offset, and the remaining damage was for Subai's already powerful physical body. It was nothing to worry about. Corpse fetuses, in the eyes of ordinary people and even most of the audience, are considered to be babies born from corpses, but this is only a special case among corpse fetuses. Generally speaking, women are actually pregnant when they die, and then he got an opportunity and continued to give birth to the child in his belly while being nourished by the corpse's temperature. But this kind of ghost baby is actually very rare to be on the stage. It is nothing more than a ghost that relies on the resentment when the mother died and the resentment transformed from the purest spiritual energy of the infant spirit. It is said that it is a ghost. The sky is just a rather prickly ghost. You should have seen A Dream of Red Mansions. Noah used the remaining stones to mend the sky and escape from the world of mortals. In fact, this can also be called a stone fetus, because it is a life born from a stone. The reproduction of humans and animals follows the laws of nature and is dictated by the laws of natural reproduction. However, some things that are not capable of reproduction but give birth to things can be called corpse fetuses. The word corpse is a general term that refers to things that do not have the ability to reproduce naturally. But humans are the spirit of all things, a life born from the creation of heaven and earth. Therefore, corpse fetuses born from human corpses are often more valuable. Those ghost babies can only be regarded as the lowest level among such corpse fetuses. Both in terms of plasticity and usability, it is much worse than the real corpse fetus. It is nothing more than being used by evil people to refine it into an imp. Gyatso was obviously very excited when he saw the corpse, so he talked a little more. That was the nature of the Buddha. He was more secular than the monk, but he always had an indifferent attitude towards things that he was not interested in. Then what can this thing do? Subai asked. By the way, isn't this something that one of your previous living Buddhas left behind on a whim? Gyatso ignored Subai's teasing. At their level, or at Subai's level, even if the previous living Buddha came back to life, no matter in terms of magic power or qualifications, he would be nothing compared to the current two, especially Subai. Comparable. I don't know the specific effects. You can try it yourself, Gyatso said with some anticipation. Anyway, you always like to eat heavy flavored food, so this time it will work. You are so excited to see this thing. Can I give it to you? Subai looked at the eel with disgust, thinking that it crawled out from between the legs of the female corpse. He really didn't have much appetite, although he knew clearly that this must be a good thing for Kyokyo to have such a big reaction, and the most important thing is that this female corpse is an object that has been suppressed for 800 years in the Gyatso temple. People said it was given to him, but he actually tinkered with it. I'm really embarrassed to keep this stuff to myself. Gyatso smiled and waved his hand. He knew Subai's character. Sometimes this guy's brain circuit was really different from other people's. He also understood that Subai was sincerely asking whether he wanted to, unless I do it now, advance to an advanced audience, otherwise my demonic body will not be able to withstand the effect of this thing, and even my demonic body will collapse if I am not careful. This thing comes out of the mother's body, just like a newborn baby. As you grow older, the spiritual energy in your body gradually dissipates. The whole grains you eat are affected by the human environment. The same goes for this corpse fetus. You have to swallow it while it's hot to have the greatest effect. Say, Lord Buddha, why do I feel that your words now sound like the Northeast? Your hometown is far away from the Northeast. Practice in the world, Gyatso said. Subai nodded. Subai felt the changes in Buddha. Especially when he came back this time, he saw him wearing casual clothes and planning to go out for supper. It seemed that the breakthrough was not far away. The monk actually still had time to think about it. I was attending a Buddhist conference in Nantung. Subai knew that there was Langshan Mountain in Nantung. It was known as one of the 10 Buddhist hills, but compared to the real mountains outside, Langshan Mountain was no different from a mound. However, it can be clearly seen from these incidents that the abnormal behavior of Gyatso and the monk is actually a precursor to self-breakthrough. Subai himself relied on chance and previous accumulation to hit the high-level audience. At a higher level, these two monks may have their own way of doing things. But, looking at the eel in his hand, Subai really felt a little uncomfortable. Pointing his finger at Gyatso, he asked, Lord Buddha, please don't trick me into eating this stuff while the fat man and the monk are not at home. You're looking down on people, right? Gyatso paused and continued, actually, my ability to cure diseases is no worse than chi leave in ancient times. Medical treatment was not divided into families, and usually the sacrifices in a tribe were in charge of totems and beliefs. You can also work part-time as a doctor while doing activities. You in the Central Plains later started to refine it, but in our place, these skills have never been left behind. After all, the historical environment of each region is different. Subai thought about it. Many people in Tibetan areas will go to monks for treatment when they are sick. Those Tibetan monks cannot just spread holy water on you and chant sutras to fool you. Otherwise, if you treat everyone to death, wouldn't it be a loss of your own reputation? As the presiding living Buddha of that temple, Gyatso may be much better than a monk who has a thorough knowledge of medical skills from the perspective of clinical experience, but Gyatso has always been a tired person. Due to his lazy temper and the presence of a monk, he seldom helped with treatment. Do you really want to swallow it? If you don't swallow it, the effect will be even worse, Gyatso reminded. Sure, Subai smiled, I'll go to the kitchen to find some vinegar. Subai walked into the kitchen with eel in one hand. There were quite a lot of ingredients in the kitchen. Subai personally patted some minced garlic and put it into a vinegar bowl. Then he took out a bottle of white wine and walked into the living room. Taking a deep breath, just when Subai was about to start swallowing, Gyatso suddenly shouted, wait a minute, I forgot a side dish. Lord Buddha, do you know that I just finally mustered up the courage to swallow this stuff with my eyes closed? After you stop it, I have to fight again mentally. Gyatso opened the door leading to the yard next to the floor-to-ceiling window, and Subai followed him. At this time, Subai discovered that the things Jixiang had planted with brain flowers as fertilizer had grown vines, like loofah vines. There is a loofah vine in the garden. I planted it in the year when my pet was lost, and now it is as tall as a canopy. Use this as a side dish to neutralize it. These two things are extremely corrosive. If you swallow them together, the side effects will be offset and the efficacy of the medicine will be maximized. Subai had personally experienced this green thing. It was very corrosive and had spirituality. Gyatso meant that he could wrap eels in these leaves and eat them. Lord Buddha, was this how you prescribed medicine before? Just use local materials. Gyatso raised his hand to Subai, indicating that Subai should eat quickly. Lord Buddha, let me say it again, if you are playing with me, I will not play with you. You know, you can't beat me now. I will call the monk later. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Didn't you have a good appetite before? You were not afraid of cold or raw food. This is such a good thing. It's a pity that I am not strong enough to tolerate it now. Otherwise, how could I have taken advantage of you? Subai raised his head slightly and wrapped the eel with leaves. Leaves and eels were not easy to get along with. When the two were superimposed, Subai felt that his palm could no longer hold it. The burning pain could be clearly felt. At the same time, there was a constant crackling sound. It feels like a person holding a teppanyaki and trying to swallow the hot iron plate together. At the same time, the eel was still twisting and twisting inside. Seems to be saying, "Eat me quickly. I'm fresh. Very fresh." Buddha was still urging from the side, "Master, use the eel quickly." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 714. Subai felt that Gyatso was getting more and more ridiculous. He even said use eel with disgusting intentions. If he hadn't been holding the eel wrapped in leaves in his hand and was about to swallow it, Subai would really have a sigh. Really means, the world is getting worse and people's hearts are no longer what they used to be. Even the Buddha has become like this. Subai still remembers the first time he met Gyatso in Tibetan area. The Buddha was shirtless and carried a hatchet on his back. He killed several people to clean up the family. At that time, the Buddha was taciturn. He was very talkative and didn't like to talk to others. He was completely different from now. However, Subai knew that monks pay attention to the practice of living in the world. The monk went to hold a Buddhist conference, and Gyatso actually knew how to go out for a walk and eat supper. They were both looking for opportunities to break through the window paper. Opening his mouth and grabbing it with both hands, Subai closed his eyes and put the eel directly into his mouth. The leaves melt in your mouth, and the eels drill in your mouth. The two things entered Subai's belly in an instant, and there was no chewing process at all. On the contrary, the one who was eating seemed a little squirmy and felt that his diaphragm was too much, but the one who was being eaten seemed to be more active. Buzz. Buzz. In an instant, Subai felt as if his whole body had been smeared with fire oil and set on fire. The burning feeling was very uncomfortable. With Subai's perverted willpower, he actually felt like it at this moment. The feeling of being about to collapse. Hiss. Subai stretched his neck, pinched his neck with both hands, and knelt down from the sofa. Gyatso stood next to Subai, making seals with his hands, and a string of bone beads appeared, and then he punched it out. The bone beads emitted blue light and floated above Subai's head. For Subai, a refreshing feeling came over him. My pain also eased a lot at this time. It feels uncomfortable at first, but it will get better slowly, Gyatso reminded. In fact, there was no need for Gyatso's reminder. Subai knew the severity in his heart. Since he had swallowed it, he had to be prepared to deal with it. There is no turning back when the bow is drawn. The little guy is no longer here, so Subai can do whatever he wants. The roars keep coming, and Subai keeps hitting the ground with his fists like a ferocious beast. Buddha stood aside and blessed Subai with cooling oil while watching Subai go crazy in pain. Subai smashed the tiles and made many holes. This made Buddha's mouth twitch. This house, he knew how strong it was. He couldn't even leave a mark on the wall by cutting it with a hatchet, but looking at the thing in front of him, it had made so many holes. After sighing, Buddha still sighed in his heart. After all, the gap between advanced listeners and experienced people was really too big. Looking at the clothes on his body, Buddha took a deep breath. He also knew that he seemed to be a different person recently. He couldn't remember that 3 years ago, he was sitting at the highest position in the temple and watching the believers worship him as a living Buddha. No longer have the so-called righteous responsibilities in my heart, and I live like a small citizen. I no longer worship the Buddha, no longer do my homework, and no longer practice. I just read newspapers and listen to music every day and then go out for a late-night snack at a food stall. My life is not considered decadent, but compared to my previous self, I have really changed a lot. But because of this, he found that his own life and perspective on life seemed to have changed a lot, and the world had another layer of meaning in his eyes. Even if he is gone, the country will still do what it should do. Unification and stability together with the future are the general trend. Things that I have always worried about before, when I do nothing, it seems that there is no disturbance. A general trend is rolling down, and people or forces that I thought were serious diseases in the past have become clowns under this general trend. In short, the earth will continue to rotate regardless of who is away from it. This is a trend and a cause and effect, a larger and more macroscopic cause and effect. Unable to help himself, Gyatso became distracted. Of course, it didn't matter whether he was distracted or not at this time, because Subai had obviously passed the initial period of pain, and his breathing gradually began to calm down. Of course, the effects are actually still fermenting and continuing, but the pain may have slowed down. Of course, it may also be that Subai has gotten used to it. Regarding Subai's perverted level of mental willpower, Gyatso felt that he was the only one who had been fighting among his playmates since he was a child. However, he felt relieved when he thought about it. Although his childhood was accompanied by bloody with fire and killing, at least there is a clear path for him to walk step by step. Even if there are a series of bloody footprints behind him, Subai is first set to a normal life experience, and then in his to distort or even subvert a normal person's 3 views is a great terror and a great torture. Subai still knelt on the ground. After the eel entered his body, it was directly dissolved by his zombie evil spirit. The reason why it dissolved so quickly was that the leaf also had a great effect, otherwise the painful feeling would still be there. It needs to be extended at least twice as long. But the spirit of the corpse is still noisy. Any intelligent life will instinctively resist death and want to continue to preserve its existence. But it is a pity that compared to the corpse energy contained in the eel, what Subai really cares about is the secret hidden in its spirit. If you want corpse energy, no matter how strong it is, can it be comparable to the rations that the person in the coffin in the place of enlightenment gives you every day? Haha, I still want to hide it. Subai muttered to himself. When he spoke, you could see that his teeth were full of blood foam. This also showed from the side how terrible the pain Subai had suffered before. This thing also wants to hide in Subai's body, or attach to Subai's soul. If Subai can't see this trick, it will be in vain. As the saying goes, how can the beasts be deceived? Zhengxiao, this thing has been suppressed for at least 800 years. The living Buddhas of all ages chanted sutras, worshipped Buddhas, blessed and sealed the seals, and never really went out to wander around. Even if a person with a 7 smart and exquisite heart was imprisoned alive for 800 years, it would be too much. What a big fool. He is really too young to compete with the audience for his calculations and calculations. In addition, after Sudbai's life level increased, the soul's sensitivity also naturally improved a lot. The opponent had nowhere to hide in his body. After several strangles at the soul level, the opponent quickly became sluggish and defeated. Was forcibly torn open by Sudbai, and its soul also began to be devoured. This feeling is actually similar to absorbing the blood of ancient vampires before. After all, what is hidden in the blood of ancient vampires is actually soul memory. It is very risky for others to use their own souls to forcibly tear the souls of others and absorb them at the same time. It's a big deal, because the soul is too delicate, and once any damage occurs, the impact will be too great. But for Sudbai, practice really makes perfect. He has eaten both essence, blood, and brain flower several times, and he is familiar with it. The road is familiar. Boom. Everything about the eel was completely erased by Sudbai, and now, Sudbai is reading his soul memory. Some of the methods of using evil spirits that he has figured out over the past 800 years have naturally begun to be accepted by Sudbai, but Sudbai is more interested. On the one hand, people have the instinct to peek into privacy, and on the other hand, Sudbai can always make many useful discoveries every time he reads these long-standing memories. From Sudbai's perspective, the surroundings were dark, but slowly, light began to appear. Memory reading. Start. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Outside, there seemed to be the sound of light raindrops falling on the eaves. It was very clear, but Sudbai didn't know what style the eaves were. The architectural styles of each place have been very different since ancient times, but Sudbai still looked at it for the time being. Not seeing this, because he read this memory from a first-person perspective, just like the previous scene where the ancient vampire witnessed the ancestor dragon holding the jade seal and killing everyone from his perspective. This woman is blinking her eyes, as if she has just woken up leisurely. Sunlight. Somewhat glaring. When she fully opened her eyes, Sudbai realized that the sound of dripping water was not because it was raining outside, but because there was an indoor rockery pool in the house. The water was still living water, and it was flowing and dripping. Sudbai was still lying on the bed. The light gauze curtains were swaying in the breeze. It was quite beautiful, but the style should not belong to the rigorous style of ancient mainland China. However, this woman continued to lie on the bed without thinking of getting up and walking around. Sudbai could only continue to look at it through her perspective. After a while, he felt a little bored. Generally speaking, the memories that can be read clearly from the depths of the soul are often the most unforgettable memories of the original owner during his lifetime, but at least now, Sudbai doesn't see anything special. However, something changed soon. The footsteps got closer and closer, and then, a tall and thin man with a beard and dressed like a Persian businessman came over. "Alyssa, my pearl, you are so beautiful." The man is telling his praises. Sudbai felt a kind of disgust, extreme disgust. This disgust does not come from Sudbai, but from this woman. Sudbai can feel whatever emotion this woman is feeling now. However, Sudbai was stunned soon. Because he saw that the man in his side had taken off all his clothes and was crawling onto the bed. "Alyssa, my pearl, you really miss me. I have longed for you for a long time. I have been dreaming about you one day. Even if I only get your body, I will be satisfied." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 715. Sudbai's current feeling is like wearing VR glasses and watching adult movies. In fact, VR glasses are still very useless, and many people buy them not for the gameplay but to experience the special effects of watching them. The feeling of first-person perspective during production. Almost. Just like Sudbai at this time, except that the first perspective is reversed. Sudbai is now in a female perspective. A man has taken off his clothes and got into bed. Now Sudbai has two choices in front of him. One is to forcibly give up this opportunity to read the memory, the other is to endure the nausea and continue reading. Fortunately, Subai's mental quality has always been excellent, and he just returned after swallowing the eel raw. What he saw in front of him was certainly disgusting, but Subai could hold on. The most important thing was that for the female corpse, the most important memory was when she was raped. At this moment, Subai also admitted defeat. But Subai still felt that things should turn around. Sure enough, when the man lowered his head and started to move his hands over the woman's body, a dagger suddenly appeared. The woman should have hidden the dagger under her body before, but at this time she directly took action and stabbed the man's chest. Puff. The man grasped the handle of the dagger that had pierced his chest with both hands, and stumbled down. For a moment, blood flowed like a profuse stream. This must have stabbed some important organ. It was not bleeding, but blood was spurting out. For a moment, the sheets were also stained red. You. The man stretched out a hand and pointed at the woman. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't. He tilted his head and fell completely against the bed. He couldn't die anymore. From the beginning to the end, what the man said was actually not Chinese at all, but another language. Subai was not a language expert, so he couldn't tell the difference. However, as a woman's first perspective, he could sense the woman's emotions and thoughts, so, although Subai couldn't understand what the man said, he could understand the meaning. The woman got up. She seemed to be unable to believe what was happening in front of her. She actually killed him. Because Subai saw from the woman's perspective that the woman's hands were trembling, a feeling of nervousness and fear was spreading. If this incident were placed in modern times, it might be a serious manifestation of domestic violence. In fact, in the real world, it is very common for wives to kill their husbands or for husbands to kill their wives. Of course, judging from the previous situation, this man and the women don't seem to be husband and wife, but rather like how Yin's Haiping felt when he secretly ate Xiao Longnu. Because when the woman got out of bed, she rolled directly down. Her limbs were sore and weak. It was obvious that she had been poisoned. But why did that knife stab so quickly and so hard just now? Was it really the small universe that exploded when his innocence was about to be tainted? Subai is just an audience. He can only analyze it through the limited perspective given by the lens. He cannot stand beside the woman and ask her, "Hey, are you poisoned?" The woman staggered while crawling and running, and fell down after running a few steps. The house was quite large, not like a traditional barbarian bedroom, but a bit like a royal palace. However, when the woman was about to reach the bedroom door was pushed open at this time. A group of maids in white clothes came in, and there was a woman in black robe in the middle. The other women were all covered with veils and couldn't see their true faces. The only one who didn't cover her face was the woman in black robe, but the black robe, the woman's face is full of pits, like a honeycomb, and it slowly opens and closes by itself. Ordinary people may be frightened and sick just by looking at her. The woman knelt down and kowtowed to the woman in black robe. The woman in black robe just stared at the woman and smiled, but this expression did not have the slightest smile effect on her face. "I asked you to be his woman so that I could take over his country. Now that you have killed him, I have wasted a lot of energy just to get this country. Do you know?" The woman continued to kneel and tremble. The person was already dead, already killed by her, and she had nothing to say. This made Subai, who was in the audience, very dissatisfied. "Damn it, you are begging for mercy, but you are trying to defend yourself. How can I get information without even giving a shit? How can I know which era and country this is?" But this woman seemed to have accepted her fate and was willing to be punished, so she said nothing and just waited for her punishment. "Since you don't want a man to touch you, then I will let you." An earthworm actually emerged from a fold on the face of the woman in black robe. The earthworm crawled out of her face, then crawled from her body to the ground, and finally crawled in front of the woman. The woman looked at the earthworm in front of her and her body trembled even more. But Subai saw clearly, damn, isn't this the eel? Is this woman planted with eels now? As an audience, you have to learn to make up for it, because some directors are good at it and create suspense, which is called leaving blank space. Some directors are not good at it, so the audience has to make up a lot of things. In addition, this woman doesn't speak, so Subai can only do his best. The ground makes up for it. Subai had obtained important valuable information from absorbing the blood of ancient vampires several times before. The earthworm crawled all the way up from the woman's knees, and finally got into the woman's nostril. Subai seemed to feel the feeling of a foreign object getting into his nostril. It was greasy, and then it went all the way down, able to feel something moving. Okay, I can build you a grave. This is my punishment for you. Do you accept it or not? The woman bowed her head more respectfully, expressing her submission. Unless a man is willing to have a relationship with you, this curse will always torture you. After the woman in black robe finished speaking, she smiled sinisterly, but I am looking forward to it. I don't know what will happen in a few decades or even 100 years, which man is willing to do that with you? Subai suddenly realized that no wonder the female corpse said mate to him inexplicably. This was the female corpse's heartache and the curse that had always been with her. She needed a man to mate with her to end the curse. But I don't know what happened. More than 800 years ago, the female corpse was discovered by the monks in the temple and was taken back by the living Buddha of that generation and suppressed. Imagine a scene. When each generation of living Buddhas is applying a solid seal, will they ever encounter a female corpse and suddenly say, please mate? But it is obvious that the aesthetics of living Buddhas of all ages are still there. In the end, the female corpse was given to Subai by Gyatso as a gift, which was a complete tragedy. Compared with the living Buddhas who suppressed her in the past, Subai was simply a bug. In the past, the living Buddhas could only suppress her, but there was nothing he could do about her. In this generation, Gyatso became the audience first. He had already broken through the limit of strength that the living Buddhas of the past generations could achieve, and he didn't take her seriously. When facing Subai, he beat her up simply and roughly, and finally forced the eel that had been in her body for who knows how many years to crawl out, and was finally wrapped in leaves and swallowed by Subai. To be honest, Subai felt a little pity for this woman. She remained silent and willing to be punished. Her subsequent situation could be described as tragic. Then, the scene turned completely dark. The woman must have died. Subai could feel the feeling of loneliness. This was the feeling of death. The woman died and entered the grave. That country should be gone, but the female corpse is still there because the curse is still there. Subai didn't know who the woman in black robe was, but her bad taste and torture methods were really admirable. She would not let you die even if she died, and she would still make you suffer humiliation hundreds of years after death. The memory is not over yet. Even though it is dark now, Subai can feel the passage of time. It is like watching a 2-hour movie. There is a plot in the first 5 minutes and the middle 110 minutes are all black scenes, but it is already in the dark. Press fast forward. Wipe, wipe, wipe. There was a violent friction sound all around, and Subai could feel that all kinds of tactile sensations were returning. Time had returned to normal. This memory should be divided into 2 parts, at least in terms of time span. Yes, the first part is 5 minutes, the second part may be about the same length, and the middle part is the fast-forward time of the female corpse staying in her own grave. Boom. The lid of the coffin was lifted, and there was a starry sky outside. The female corpse slowly opened her eyes. She has been sleeping for countless years. Even a pig can give you a life of more than 1,000 years if it is left in a specific environment and feng shui position. Conjuring up a pig and a hyena. The coffin board was lifted, and the female corpse opened her eyes. This is the rhythm of pretending to be a corpse. It is like watching a Hollywood blockbuster. The first part is full of foreshadowing and disgusting rescue of the world. In the end, it finally reaches the climax. Chow performed with special effects. As the only audience, Subai was really excited. He didn't know who was so unlucky to open this coffin. But soon, Subai no longer wanted to watch a movie. Because of a conversation coming from the coffin. Amitba, this coffin is not old enough. He was clearly a monk, and I heard he must be quite old. Hey, this woman still has something in her stomach. It's a pity. The year is really not enough. If we hadn't met her in this place, we would have made a midnight snack if we met her under normal circumstances. When Subai heard this voice, his heart suddenly suffocated. This voice was very familiar to Subai. It was the voice of the person in the coffin in the place of enlightenment. Subai once lay beside the coffin to accompany him for a month. This voice, Subai will definitely remember, it is that fat middle-aged man. Silence, this was the voice of the third man. Forget it, it's too late. He is. An old photo immediately appeared in Subai's mind. This was a photo that the monk found for him at Chongsheng Temple in Dali. There were 3 people in the photo. One is an old monk, and the other is a middle-aged man with a stout figure. There is still one. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 716. Before, I would have thought it was a supernatural event. The 2 of them finished their supper and left the private restaurant. There was no suitable place to talk at night, so they simply sat together in Chu Zhao's police car. But now, I really want to think about it. Chu Zhao held a photo in one hand and a cigarette in the other, frowning as he spoke. But we are the audience, Suner said. If we are ordinary people, it is actually easy to understand, but we are the audience, how could our memories be erased? One of the most powerful aspects of radio is that it can deal with a dead listener in the most normal way. His relatives, his friends, and people he is close to will all think that this person's death is very ordinary. This is already a power beyond the understanding of ordinary people, and even beyond the understanding of the audience. Just like when Lychee could erase a British city, she could not directly change the minds of some people and make it natural. To paraphrase a lyric from the Song of the Seven Sons, but what they took away was my body, but you still kept the soul in my heart. But under the intervention of radio, you don't even have your soul. Tisk, I can't figure this out either. Logically speaking, for example, if you die, I know how you died, because the broadcast will not change my memory as a listener. Chu Zhao shook his head. Let's just say it doesn't make sense. Broadcasting will only change the memory of ordinary people, not the memory of listeners. Otherwise, if everyone is treated equally, there will be very funny scenes. For example, Listener A is chatting with Listener B, exchanging information about familiar listeners, and Listener C is he died in a car accident, audience member D drowned, and audience member E fell to his death from the stairs. This scene was so inconsistent. We actually have a friend who has always been with us. She is very close. She even came to the party after we bought the tombstone. This is enough to explain the problem. Otherwise, ordinary friends would not be treated like that. We didn't even have an appointment with Gu Fan that day. Chu Zhao, you know, I have actually thought about some possibilities, but every time I think about it, I feel a chill on my back. Imagine a life that you always thought you remembered clearly. It turns out that there was always a person who had a good relationship with you and was always involved in your life, but you forgot about it. But when all the memories about him are eliminated, you don't even feel a little awkward. There is no sense at all, not even a little loophole. Maybe there was some accident somewhere else. Chu Zhao blew out a smoke ring. The question is, why can she be seen in the photo again at this time? I still suspect that she may really just be a relatively high-level person. The dead souls, or were they the ones we brought out from the cemetery that day, came out with us on a whim to have a barbecue and then got into some mischief, and came over to join us when we took a group photo? It's just because our strength is relatively low that we can't notice it, and neither you nor I are enhanced Taoist monks. Use your brain, my director Chu. Do you usually handle cases with such chaotic and explosive thinking? It can be said to be normal, but he was there at the time. How could he not notice that there was a ghost among us? Suner was naturally referring to Subai. Chu Zhao opened his mouth, but had to admit that Suner's analysis was correct. This alone was enough to completely overturn his previous assumptions. Because Subai was present, it was impossible for him not to notice that there was a ghost approaching next to him. Unless the ghost is powerful enough to completely block Subai's perception, but how scary is a ghost that can completely block Subai's perception? By the way, you reminded me, hurry up, start the car, Suner urged. Where to go? Chu Zhao asked as he started the car. Idiot, it's a cemetery. In a place like the cemetery park, even if you come during the day in the summer, you will feel quite cool, even a little too cool. What's more, if you come in the middle of the night, the atmosphere is really sufficient. After Chu Zhao parked the car, he entered the cemetery area with Suner. With their current abilities, it was naturally very simple to avoid the security guards who kept vigil in the cemetery area. The two of them had a clear goal, which was to find the three of them. The cemetery was purchased together. After arriving at the exact location, Suner used his mobile phone to turn on the flashlight. The first thing he saw was Subai's tombstone, then his own tombstone, and then Chu Zhao's. When he was about to check the fourth one in a row, when placing the tombstone, Suner glanced at Chu Zhao specifically, and Chu Zhao also swallowed his saliva. Obviously, both of them knew that for some things, whether the speculations of themselves and others were true would be revealed in the next second. The mobile phone flashlight moved over. When they saw a black and white photo of an old man placed on the tombstone, both Suner and Chu Zhao let out a sigh of relief at the same time. A false alarm. That's not true. As for who the woman in the photo is, we can only ask Subai after contacting him. I'm shocked. I always thought I was missing something in my life. Suner nodded with deep feeling. Yes, this kind of fear seems to be heavier than the threat of death. However, at this moment, Suner seemed to notice something wrong and looked at the tombstone on the other side. Because before, she looked to the left from Subai's side, but what about the one on Subai's right? Chu Zhao saw Suner's gaze and immediately realized that he seemed to have relaxed too early. This time Chu Zhao simply turned on the backlight of his phone and walked over, squatting down with the screen of his phone pressed against the tombstone. A picture of a girl. Although it is black and white. But Chu Zhao can be sure. That's the girl in the photo. She bought a sitting tombstone with us. Chu Zhao's mouth opened slightly, and a cold feeling spread throughout his body. Looking at the photo of the girl on the tombstone, he really couldn't think of anything about her, and he didn't feel that anything was missing from his previous memory. But the facts told him. This girl should occupy a large proportion in his life, no less than Subai and Suner. Suner was covering her forehead with one hand at this time. She felt a headache, because this discovery was likely to overturn her previous memory, and memory was sometimes equivalent to life. Called Dabai, Chu Zhao lit another cigarette for himself. This time his hands were shaking, and he lit the lighter 3 times before he lit it. I can only rely on him. I sent him a WeChat message and called him when I came, but he didn't reply to my message or answer the phone. He must be busy, Suner replied, but, Chu Zhao, since we saw it in the photo, I found her and found the tombstone with her here, So I can at least be sure that at the moment after the story world of Mr. Zombie ended last time, this girl was still one of our friends. Let's buy it together. We picked up the tombstone and went to have a barbecue together. Now that her image has appeared in the group photo and the photo on the tombstone is also hers, does that mean that her erased existence has been re-released for some unknown reason, like a deleted version of some TV series? It was revealed. Chu Zhao nodded, I understand. I will go back to the bureau to check now. The photos in the group photo are actually quite clear. It shouldn't be difficult to find her identity information, if her information is really fully released. Yes. Let's go to the cemetery office first. We will directly check their internal information. I remember that when I bought the tomb, I registered the information. Dabai's basic information and mine are all here. She should also be there. At least, she has a name and birth date. Date. Haha, this is like being a policeman. Go now, before you come in police uniform during the day. The two of them are not afraid of trouble. After all, they are a type of people who have broken away from the secular rules. As long as they are not killing people and setting fires, they can do other things much more casually. The door of the cemetery office was pried open by Chu Zhao. Suner turned on the computer, checked it, and said, the information is not locked or confidential. It is not difficult to find, it just takes a little time. The security is coming over there. I'll let them go to bed early. Chu Zhao patted Suner on the shoulder, look for it. After saying that, Chu Zhao walked out of the office. When the night watch security guards suddenly turned on the lights in the office, they naturally came over to take a look. They were very dedicated, but there was nothing they could do. Chu Zhao punched one of them unconscious and put the two security guards on the lawn. Let them sleep here first. I don't know if they will catch a cold when they wake up tomorrow. And Suner has already started searching quickly. The cemetery does not take any measures to protect the information here. It is also estimated that no one will be very interested in the news about the dead, and neither will those who engage in telecommunications fraud. Stupid enough to buy information from dead people. The cemetery is organized according to the tombstone area. Suner first found the area where his tombstone was located, and then deduced the girl's serial number based on the tombstone serial numbers of himself and Chuzaya Subai. The serial number was quickly launched, and then when you get down, you start searching directly. Soon, you hit the enter key. The identity information is displayed on the screen. The photo is the photo on the tombstone, but it is a color photo on the computer. Then, Suner looked at the names in the information column, but at this moment, there was a sudden pop, the computer screen instantly went dark, the lights went out, and there was a power outage. Suner was a little anxious, why was there a power outage at this time, but soon, Suner suddenly thought of something. That is, this girl should be dead. Then according to everyone's previous agreement. Her ashes. In fact, it has been placed under the tombstone. It's actually here. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 717. There is a saying that flowers planted intentionally will not bloom, but willows planted unintentionally will create shade. If Subai liked the role of listener at first because he could enter the story world to satisfy his special spiritual needs, now, his subjective initiative lies in his son was lost, so he wanted to become stronger and then seek revenge on that man and woman. From the perspective of a third-party observer, Subai's life was incomplete and ups and downs, but because of Subai's own character and his perverted willpower, people tend to ignore his experience. Sometimes, Subai himself also wondered whether they did it intentionally when the little guy was taken away. Maybe they didn't want to see him continue to be decadent, and his son would be older and younger. His decadence might have affected their plans. And now they are more willing to see themselves who are extremely eager to pursue power. But there really is no other way. Even if I know now that I am still walking along the path set by the other party, there is really no other choice but to bite the bullet and continue on. Fortunately, that man and woman were not broadcasters after all, at least they did not represent the absolute highest status. As long as they were not broadcasters, Subai was confident that he could overthrow them. They made their own plans, and whether they can succeed in the end depends on whether Subai really cooperates with them. When the Chinese Empire came to China, they were very casual about Japan. Even in the late Qing dynasty, the government was bullied by Westerners. It's embarrassing. At least it's okay to knead and beat the Japanese at will. Li Hongjiang's Beiyang fleet once went to Japan to land to replenish supplies. It scared everyone from the emperor to the traders and foot soldiers in Japan, but the subsequent Sino-Japanese War directly changed it. The national destiny of the two countries. Taking this as an example is actually not very appropriate, but Subai doesn't care whether it is appropriate or not. People always need a little chicken soup to replenish their body. Whether it is black chicken soup or white chicken soup, Subai is willing to take a sip. It is really difficult to face the situation in the future. A man and a woman, both physically and mentally, will be under great pressure. Su Yuhang's voice appeared above, but Subai didn't know where this place was. Above his head was the starry sky, but there were only a few stars, and they emitted a strange light. The three people standing above also none of them showed their faces, but Su Yuhang's last words of silence seemed to be that he had really discovered something. Subai once met Su Yuhang in his memory world, and that time, Su Yuhang seemed to sense something. Later, the broadcast cloned Su Yuhang and Subai's cheap mother in the ancient corpse world of Mr. Zombie. But it failed, and the black dragon in the next room also died inexplicably. Many details can explain how powerful this man and woman are now, and there are even vague signs of transcending ordinary power. Clang. There was not much information. Apart from memorizing the arrangement of a few stars in his field of vision, Subai didn't get anything else. The coffin lid was put back on, but it was obviously not tight and seemed very casual. The three of them didn't seem interested in catching eels. After that, darkness fast-forwarded for an unknown amount of time, until one day, the coffin lid, which had not been covered by the rules before, moved away due to the polish of the years. Then, the female corpse slowly opened her eyes again. Buzz. Subai also opened his eyes, but at this time he was standing in the living room of Lao Fang's house, stretched out his hand to touch his face, and the memory reading was concluded. Gyatso handed Subai a cup of tea, and Subai took it and sat on the sofa. Is it effective? Buddha asked. Thank you. Subai hadn't had time to sort out the techniques he had learned about how to use zombie evil spirits. Most of his thoughts were still in the memory fragments. Obviously, Su Yuhang, the old monk and the fat man were not in their own time stream when they opened the coffin. So where were the three of them at that time? In the story world? Or is it in a secret realm that can change the flow of time? What the fat man said, hey, this woman still has something in her stomach. It's a pity. The year is really not enough. If we hadn't met her in this place, if we met her under normal circumstances, it would really be a midnight snack. In this paragraph, it has been explained that they should not be in the normal flow of time in the real world at that time. Why are you in a daze? Gyatso asked when he saw that Subai was distracted. He was a little worried that the drug was too powerful and caused some shock to Subai's soul. Lord Buddha, I want to ask you something. Subai put his fingers on the coffee table and began to draw directly. What he drew was the starry sky he saw while lying in the coffin in the memory picture. Although Subai is not an astronomer, nor is he an astronomy enthusiast. Even when he was a young man, he did not have the habit of getting an astronomical telescope to look at the stars. But at least one thing was very clear to Subai. He was in the memory picture before. The starry sky you see is definitely not the starry sky in the real world. This, and this, there are only so many things I can see, but they should be a kind of constellation that can be connected. The coffee table was made of glass, but Subai actually scratched it with his fingers, which showed his subtle control of power after being promoted to a senior audience. At first, Buddha's attention was on Subai's fingers. This time when Subai came back, he saw too many magics in Subai that were only for advanced listeners. It was as if everyone was not playing a game at all. A more common analogy is that the strength of both parties is understood, just like a knife of the same size, but he uses it like a child wielding the knife, while Subai wields it like an adult. Knives are all knives, but the effects when used are really very different. But soon, Buddha was attracted by the stars drawn by Subai. After Subai described the color of each star and the light it released, Buddha's brows immediately frowned. Seeing the expression on the Buddha's face, Subai knew that he was safe. Kilu and Gyatso were both contemporary eminent monks and were extremely knowledgeable. If you asked them about something, you would be able to get some discoveries and information if nothing else happened. This is Abi Hel. Gyatso looked at Subai. Did you just read her memory? It's just a fragment, Subai said. It can't be the whole life, otherwise you wouldn't be you. Buddha's words are a bit arrogant. In fact, if you directly read another person's memory from beginning to end, then is it you or another person? You have understood the joys and sorrows of her entire life. In the end, are you still purely yourself? Do you know Dante's Divine Comedy? Gyatso asked again. Subai nodded. You mean what I just saw in the memory screen was hell? Absolutely. Abi means intermittent in Sanskrit, which means pain without interruption. Buddhism believes that people who have done bad things during their lifetime will fall into hell after death, and those who have committed 10 unwholesome deeds will suffer eternal suffering in Abi hell. With Mount Sumeru as the center, it is surrounded by 4 continents. In the Aral Sea between Jinshan Mountain and Dadioi Mountain, there are 4 continents, namely Dongshan Shenzhou, Nanzan Buzhu, and Zabuzhu. Niuhezhu, Bajuluzhu, and 9 mountains and 8 seas are the 3,000 worlds in Buddhism. The infinite hell is located under Nanfan Buzhu, covering an area of about 20,000 yojanas, or more than 300,000 kilometers. According to Buddhist scriptures, the great city of Abi is 20,000 yojanas wide and deep, which is about 90 billion square kilometers, or again about 10,000 territories of China. The stars you draw and describe should be unique to the eternal hell. Stars are formations, that is, the entire world is a formation, constantly refining the darkness of the dead souls in this world. There really is a place called Infinite Hell. Subai reached out and rubbed his chin. So this is where Su Yuhang and the others went in the first place? How do I get to this place? After becoming a listener, he saw the scene of the ancestral dragon holding the jade seal crushing the black dragon. Subai also knew that some stories in myths and legends may not really be myths. Just commit suicide. Gyatso's answer was straightforward. You know that's not what I asked, Subai reminded. Actually, the gate of hell occasionally opens in the human world. For example, Japan's night parade of 100 demons is the most direct example. There are many myths about the gate of hell in both the East and the West, but as for how to find the specific location, I don't know. It's mostly just luck. That's all for nothing. Subai shook his head. He had found some traces of Su Yuhang, but he couldn't go to that place. It felt like he had done a useless job. Let's discuss it with him when Kilo comes back. In fact, there are ways to go there by force, Gyatso said hesitantly, but I don't know if it is safe for you to go to that place by force, even for you now. Generally speaking, Wujian Hell is another plane different from this real world. Buddhism and Taoism emphasize the salvation of dead souls. Where do the souls of the dead go when they are saved? Isn't that where it is? But this is a shuttle between world planes, and there is no absolute security measure to broadcast that everything is completed in a flash of white light. If you forcefully go there, let's not say whether you can succeed. Even if you go, it may have a great impact on you. After all, the redeemed soul, and you, a living person, are two different concepts. At this time, Subai's cell phone suddenly rang. While listening to Gyatso's words, Subai took out his cell phone and looked at it. It was Chu Zhao's call. Subai pressed the answer button. Hello. Hey, bye Max, where are you? Chu Zhao's voice sounded more urgent. I'm in Shanghai, say. Come quickly to the cemetery, where we bought tombstones last time. Something happened, something really happened. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 718. What's the matter? Gyatso asked. The call was disconnected before I could explain clearly. Subai waved his cell phone. I'm going out for a while, do you want to come with me? Where? Cemetery Park. You can handle it on your own, right? I'll check some more information, Gyatso said, tapping his fingers on the coffee table. Indeed, with Subai's current strength, it doesn't really matter whether he goes to help or not. It would be better to stay at home and look through some classics to see if he can find any more information. By the way, there's one more thing I want to ask you, Subai said while picking up the car keys. That hell seems to have the ability to change the flow of time, but it shouldn't be the story world. Gyatso nodded, indicating that he understood. Subai walked out of the house. His Pusa was still parked at the same place. After getting in, he started the car and found that the oil was full. Apparently Gyatso and the monk would occasionally drive it. After driving on the elevated highway, Subai took out his mobile phone to call Chu Zhao, but the message on the other end kept saying that the number you dialed was not in the service area. To be honest, this notification sound was very common 7 or 8 years ago, but in recent times, today, as China's basic communication facilities have become increasingly perfect over the past few years, this situation rarely occurs, and the cemetery park is not in a wilderness. 20 minutes later, Subai arrived at the cemetery park. He had been speeding all the way. After getting out of the car, Subai saw another person standing at the door. The other person also noticed Subai's arrival, turned around, and waved to Subai. I didn't expect to meet you here. I originally wanted to meet you for tea tomorrow, Xie Chen said while wiping the frame of the mirror with a handkerchief. He seemed to have just arrived and hadn't gone in yet. Why are you here? Subai took the initiative to walk over. The underlying meaning of the sentence was to ask if what happened here was your fault. It would make sense if Ji Zhen was playing something here and Chu Zhao was trapped inside. I said that I happened to pass by nearby and sensed the energy fluctuations inside. Do you believe it? Ji Zhen shrugged helplessly, but the mobile phone signal is very poor when you get close to here. I have 2 friends in there. Subai walked into the cemetery park as he spoke. At this time, there was no need to delve into whether Xie Zhen was telling the truth or a lie. The magnetic field is a bit messy. Xie Zhen also walked in with Subai. Indeed, as soon as you enter the actual scope of the cemetery park, you can clearly feel the somewhat chaotic magnetic field environment around you, which can affect people's sensory perception to a certain extent. For ordinary people, it may feel a little uncomfortable, but Subai and Ji, since both of them are advanced listeners, they can naturally experience it more delicately. Your friend is probably over there. Xie Zhen pointed to the office area on the west side of the cemetery park. There were all bungalows there, but the decoration was pretty good, and that location was where all the chaotic magnetic fields emanated. Subai walked over there. Xie Zhen yawned as he followed Subai. Since he was here, there was no reason not to go and take a look. In fact, he was just eating with Liang Sen in a nearby restaurant. After midnight snack, Liang Sen seemed to sense something when he drove back, so he asked Xie Zhen to come over and take a look. As for Liang Sen, he went back by himself. Subai! Subai! 2 calls came from the flower garden in front of the office, and then Chu Zhao, covered in blood, climbed out of it. He was really embarrassed now. Subai stretched out his hand to help Chu Zhao up, frowning slightly. Because he found that Chu Zhao was not seriously ill except that he was a little depressed. There were a lot of bloody wounds on his body, but they were not deep. He Jizhen, who was standing behind, smiled, "This feels like overindulgence." Chu Zhao weakly glanced at Xie Zhen behind Subai. He didn't get angry when the other party teased him. Even when facing Subai, he understood the gap in status. Since that person could be with Subai, naturally, he was on the same level as Subai, and the other party didn't care about him. "Sooner is in there," cough. Chu Zhao coughed. His body was really weak now. Ji Zhen just teased him that he was overindulging in sex. In fact, it was almost the same. He looked like an ordinary person. The result of encountering a female ghost was that her yang energy was sucked away, but Chu Zhao was now a low-level listener. The probability of encountering such a powerful ghost in the real world should not be very high. Subai walked over and reached out to open the door, but felt a biting coldness coming from the door handle. Subai exerted a little force, and the entire door immediately broke away from the wall. When Subai walked in, he saw Suner lying on the ground. Suner's face was almost the same as Chu Zhao's. She was pale, and there was no trace of blood even on her lips. She had completely passed out, and the air conditioner seemed to be blowing away in the office. It was adjusted to the lowest level, and the cold wind was blowing. Picking up Suner and looking at her slightly frowning eyebrows, Subai sighed. There was nothing unusual in the office. When Subai walked out of the office with Suner in his arms, he saw that Chu Zhao was being treated by the doctor over there. "Feed the elixir." Subai remembered that when he was seriously injured, Liang Sen and Xie Zhen provided him with a herbal medicine so that he could go to Xian. Although it was partly to let him take the blame, it was enough to show that these two people were surrounded by talented people. Daibao has a lot of these things in stock. Is there another one unconscious in there? Xie Zhen tapped his finger on Chu Zhao's eyebrows to speed up the evaporation of the elixir's effect, then stood up and walked to Subai, checking Suner's condition, exactly the same, excessive loss of essence and blood. "Can you guess what is causing trouble?" Subai looked around. All around were tombstones. At this time in the morning, the place seemed too dead. "I don't know." Ji Zhen shook his head, "but it shouldn't be an audience, otherwise it would be too boring." Subai agreed on this point, and it should not be the fault of the listeners. Although Suner and Chu Zhao were low-level listeners, if something unexpected happened, the troublesome listener would also be punished by the broadcast, and the gain would not be worth the loss. Subai, photo, look, photo. Chu Zhao was given an elixir by the doctor. Chu Zhao seemed to have recovered a little energy and blood. At this time, he took out a photo from his pocket and raised his arm with difficulty to hand it to Subai. Subai walked over and reached out to take the photo. Xie Zhen also came over at this time. "Is there anything abnormal?" Xie Zhen asked. He didn't care about anything anyway. He just wanted to watch the fun. The same mentality as when Subai entered that node in Guangzhou, he just came to fight. "A soy sauce. When we took the photo, there were only 3 of us, but now there is one more person." Subai tapped a woman's face with his fingers. "This woman was not there at the time. Next to your tombstone, there is also her tombstone." Chu Zhao still struggled to speak at this time. He was very anxious, but he had to tell Subai the information he and Suner had found before. Although it was a bit intermittent, but at least he explained the matter clearly. Afterwards, he was so tired that even though he had just taken the elixir of understanding, he couldn't hold on any longer and fell asleep directly. Subai held the photo in his hand and flicked it casually. There seemed to be no danger here. After all, both Chu Zhao and Suner were just symptoms of excessive weakness. They could be tortured like this. If they wanted to take their lives, it would be the same. An extremely simple thing, but the unknown thing didn't do it. Well, maybe the extra girl in the photo didn't do that. Obviously she didn't want to kill someone. What do you think? Ji Zhen looked at Subai. He had heard clearly what Chu Zhao said before, and now he wanted to hear Subai's opinion. Broadcasters are very disciplined. Subai said this. Xie Zhen nodded. Indeed, then this shouldn't be the fault of the radio. We are listeners, so the radio will not interfere with our memories. For him, this is too low of a level. But the people in the photo. Subai pursed his lips. Let's go to the tombstone first. There is indeed nothing to be afraid of when two high-level listeners are together. Subai does not believe that the other party has the ability to torture himself and Ji Zhen into the appearance of Suner and Chu Zhao. This is it. Subai found his own tombstone first, then moved down it and saw the girl's tombstone next to his own tombstone. Open it and take a look. Xie Zhen held the tombstone with one hand and waited for Subai's decision. Let's go. Subai confirmed. Good. Ji Zhen smiled slightly and exerted force with his palms. Not only the tombstone, but also the circle of mud blocks and cement boards all floated up at this time. Below, a small pit appeared, with an exquisite urn inside. There really is something. This surprised Subai. He squatted down, reached out, and took the urn in his hand to play with it. Are there any ashes? Xie Zhen also squatted down. Why do I feel that our simple and rough treatment is too disappointing for the night and the environment here? Both of them are high-level listeners, so naturally they won't worry about being scared or affected by ghosts, because unless the broadcaster is really blind, there should be no wild people in the real world who can compete with boss-level listeners. Exist. Have. Subai opened the urn without hesitation. There was pure white dust in the box. This girl must have been so pure during her lifetime, and her ashes after death are actually so white, Xie Zhen said with some surprise. Then, he saw Subai stretch out his index finger, dip some ashes into it, put it into his tongue and lick it. Xie said, haha, you are too harsh. Pearl powder. Subai confirmed, if you want, you can apply it on your face later to whiten it. In the urn, there were actually not ashes, but pearl powder. Subai inserted his finger into the urn. Then his hands shook and he took out a photo. On the photo, a girl was sitting by the window of a coffee shop with a cup of coffee in front of her. Subai knew this coffee shop, and Subai also knew this girl. She was Suner. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 719. When Chu Zhao woke up, he found that he was lying on the hospital bed. In the bed next to his, Suner hadn't woken up yet, and he was getting an intravenous drip, now with saline. His head still hurt a little, but he was not in a hurry to get out of bed, because before he fell asleep, he remembered that Subai was here, and he had made the matter clear to Subai. Now, he could relax a little and rest. The sky was falling, and there was someone taller holding it up. Among the three, Subai was the strongest. For the fourth woman who suddenly appeared, it was naturally safest to leave it to Subai to investigate. At this time, Subai was sitting at the breakfast bar in front of the hospital with Xie Zhen. Subai ordered a fried dough stick and a bowl of soy milk, while Xie Zhen ordered a basket of steamed dumplings and a bowl of wontons. Subai's appetite was not very good. After all, he just swallowed an eel last night. Xie Zhen ate quite deliciously. He had no psychological pressure to begin with. He was just a passerby watching the excitement, so he naturally didn't need to worry too much about anything. Of course, this matter was indeed very interesting. The two sent Suner and Chu Zhao to the hospital together, and then sat on the hospital corridor bench, passing cigarettes to each other and chatting, and waited until dawn before coming down to have breakfast. Call. The last wonton was taken into his mouth and swallowed. He took out a wet wipe and wiped his mouth with great satisfaction. Subai still held the fried dough sticks and rode in the soy milk. When he saw that Zhen Zhen had finished eating, he said, "I remember that you are a person who never tires of fine food and fine food. Another meaning of this is that you are a very hypocritical person, a person who has high requirements for the quality and style of life. When you drink white wine, you have the attitude of drinking white wine. When you drink red wine, you have the attitude of drinking red wine. When you eat Western food, you have the attitude of eating Western food. When you eat Chinese breakfast, you have the attitude of eating Chinese breakfast." Xie Zhen was explaining. But Subai quickly interrupted Xie Zhen's explanation. "The key is that you used to think that you and I were not on the same level, so you were just being pretentious on purpose." Subai hit the nail on the head. Ji Zhen smiled and said no more explanations. There was no need to explain. Yes, even when he had not been promoted to senior audience before, he was still considered to be the top few among the senior people, and he was only one step away from senior audience. It was really just one step away, so it was inevitable that I had already put myself into the mentality of a high-level audience. When facing Subai, I seemed to be a little deliberately friendly, that is, a little more reserved. But now, both of them are high-level listeners, with equal status, so they can let go. My friend, there are really two equal strings of money. I'm curious about what her purpose is." Subai still held the photo in his hand and looked at it. In the photo, Suner was sitting there drinking coffee, looking peaceful and peaceful. Xie Zhen knew about Subai's life experience. He had semi-joined the circle of Lao Fang's family before, so Subai's life experience was not a secret to him. Subai remembered that when he sensed the woman's presence, he searched everywhere, and finally found Suner outside this cafe. Then it became clear who took the photo of Suner. As far as I know, Subai paused. They seem to enjoy experimenting. A scam experiment. Xie Zhen stood up, paid for breakfast, then walked to the door of the breakfast shop and straightened his suit collar. He didn't sleep all night last night, but there was no trace of tiredness on his face, and his whole person was also. He still seemed meticulous. In the past, Subai thought his temperament was quite good, but now he feels that this guy may simply have obsessive-compulsive disorder. It is true that the positions of both parties are equal, and their opinions are different. It should be so. There is only one simple soul-absorbing formation in the cemetery area. It couldn't be simpler. Even if you are not a listener, a metaphysician with a little bit of knowledge can break it, let alone the strength of the two low-level listeners. An identity, Subai said as he walked toward the hospital with He Zhen. But they were still almost drained of their spiritual energy, and they didn't even resist much. Xie Zhen smiled, "It's really interesting. I suddenly felt that the excitement last night was not in vain, because there seemed to be a door leading to a new world. It's opening up to me. It's really interesting." The two senior audience members chatted and said that this was a very interesting thing. Even though Suner and Chu Zhao were still lying on the hospital bed, Subai didn't feel that there was anything wrong with what he said. But if you want to perfectly immerse yourself in this scam, you still need to experience it again. Xie Zhen habitually took out his cigarette case, but there was no cigarette in it. He was not used to smoking Subai's cigarettes, so he kept no. "You mean, you and me?" Subai asked. "Archimedes once said, 'Give me a lever and I can move the entire earth.' Isn't this scam the same thing?" Xie Zhen crossed his fingers and looked a little excited. "Use the simplest way. The formation method, but it almost drained the blood of two low-level listeners and turned them into helpless lambs, which is equivalent to buying a house in the second ring road of Beijing with 100 yuan. The first metaphor is quite stylish, but the second metaphor is completely tacky." Subai shook his head helplessly. The guy who used to think it was pretty good and mysterious, but when he stood at the same height as them, it turned out that why do you think it's all a bunch of jokes? It's not like you don't know that my hometown is from the Northeast. If I hadn't become an audience, as an ordinary person, I would probably still be crying for the house in Shanghai. Ji Zhen stretched out his hand to tidy up Subai. After checking the collar, a man helped another man adjust his collar so carefully. It was a strange move, but Xie Zhen finally reached out and patted Subai on the shoulder, so I'm very grateful. I'm grateful that it gave me a lot of help. The same life freed me from the lifelong entanglements of ordinary people living in a house with daily necessities such as firewood, rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, tea, and a house, and allowed me to see a different scenery. Crazy, Subai cursed. You should say this to those dead experiencers and low-level listeners. Okay, let's go to that cemetery. It should be your mother's handiwork. I really can't wait. Xie Zhen stretched out his hand to adjust the frame of his glasses. Actually, there is one more thing I'm more curious about. This scam can deceive two low-level listeners, but it will definitely not deceive you. But by doing this, isn't she just telling you clearly? So what is her purpose? I don't know. Subai shook his head. I really don't know what they are going to do, but I only know one thing, and that is that sooner or later, I will crush their heads. Xie Zhen shrugged, but I think there is a higher chance that you will be treated as a toy and played with from beginning to end. Forget it, I won't hurt your subjective initiative. You can go up and see them first, and I will arrange the cemetery area. It is forbidden to receive other people there today, and the whole park is closed. Whether he asks his audience to do it or lets his influence in the real world do it, it is not difficult for him. Subai nodded and walked up to the hospital building. When he opened the ward door, Suner and Chu Zhao were already awake. Suner was sitting on the hospital bed, still very haggard, while Chu Zhao was sitting cross-legged, holding the phone as if talking to someone. When Subai came in, their eyes all fell on Subai. Subai, Chu Zhao shouted excitedly. Although he was still very weak now, that incident could indeed make him excited, oh no, or terrifying. I brought you some breakfast. Subai took a look and saw that they were still receiving infusions, so they probably wouldn't be very hungry. Subai, who is she? Suner also asked at this time. She looked very bad, but it was obvious that she was very concerned about the identity of that girl, a girl who appeared and disappeared in her life. Subai took out a cigarette, lit it, and then threw one to Chu Zhao. Chu Zhao licked his chapped lips. He had no intention of smoking at this time, but Subai seemed to be deliberately holding back the news about the girl. You should be able to find information about that girl in the office. Have you checked? Suner asked again. If there hadn't been a sudden power outage, she would have been able to read through the information. He. Subai shook his head. I didn't look. Have you forgotten? Suner was very puzzled. With Subai's meticulousness, it should be impossible to ignore this matter. What you have to do now is to recover with peace of mind and don't worry so much. As for that girl, there is no such person at all, Subai said. How is that possible? Chu Zhao said excitedly. She should exist, it's just that our memory has been erased. You are listeners. It is impossible for the radio to erase your memories. Subai pointed at his head again. It is also impossible to erase my memory. She does not exist. You have been deceived, Subai explained. Dabai, Suner said with some confusion at this time. Is it inconvenient for us to know? After hearing this, Chu Zhao seemed to understand something. Since the memory of that girl had been erased, her strength level might be terrifying. The strength level of the two of them was far from the qualifications to know. This is just like when he misunderstood Subai's handling of Xiao Hui when he was not an audience. Okay, I won't ask any more. Thank you, Dabai. Without you yesterday, maybe we would have told you where it was. Chu Zhao didn't ask any more. Suner also smiled gratefully at Subai. Subai suddenly felt ridiculous. What made these two people continue to insist on the existence of that girl? This is obviously a scam. Why does a person who clearly does not exist in the cognition of these two people? Suddenly, Subai thought of understanding Zhen's previous question below. What meaning does that woman want to convey through the scam that cannot deceive high-end audiences? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Long. Chapter 720. When Subai left the ward and walked to the door of the hospital, Xiezhen drove over and signaled Subai to get in the car. When I got in the car, I lit another cigarette out of habit, not minding that the car was as tidy as someone with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Xiezhen frowned slightly, but didn't say anything. There was really no need to say anything. The two of them still firmly believe that the girl is there. Subai stretched out his hand out of the window to shake the ashes and said, "It's hopeless. The altitude is different, and the scenery you see is naturally different." Xiezhen felt a bit like a spiritual counselor at this time, but he also knew it. In fact, Subai himself knew exactly what was going on, and he also understood Subai. It's just emotion for the sake of emotion. It's different. Subai shook his head. It's not that simple, and they are not that stupid. They are not stupid people. What exactly does it feel like? Let's go and experience it ourselves when we arrive later. Ji Zhen looked at the time and continued, I invited a low-level listener to come over. He is an array mage, which is just enough and obedient. Is humans' inherent thinking really that scary? Subai searched in the car, found a bottle of mineral water and took a sip. It's like that boring experiment where you cut your fingers and cover your eyes with water. There is also a very familiar experiment, which is to energize a cage, and the monkeys will be electrocuted as soon as they touch it. Then no monkeys dare to touch the cage. After that, the monkeys are slowly replaced with new monkeys one by one. It is obvious that there is no longer electricity. But each of these new monkeys who had never been electrocuted dared to touch the cage. These experiments are usually used as examples of chicken soup for the soul. Subai blew out a smoke ring, but it is estimated that few people can understand the philosophical truth. Philosophy seems useless, but in fact it is very useful. But generally you can only truly understand what philosophy means when you get older. Xiezhen suddenly seemed to think of something as he spoke, and said, Subai, is it possible that the woman just wanted to convey this meaning to you? You're talking without any beginning or end, Subai said with some dissatisfaction. You know what it means. Do you think we are the people in the laboratory who were blindfolded with cut fingers and scared themselves to death, or a group of monkeys who still don't dare to touch the cage without electricity? What do you think? Ji Zhen reached out and asked Subai for a cigarette. Usually he was too lazy to smoke Subai's cigarettes, but now this move showed that he was not at peace in his heart at this time. Subai once worked with the monk in a hotel, wrapped in bath towels, to deduce some truths about the pre-Qin period. Almost a century ago, a meeting on a small boat on the lake opened a new China. This shows that sometimes some shocking assumptions and conjectures it does not require the person to take a bath, change clothes, burn incense, and purify himself. Sometimes, it is actually an opportunity. What if? Xiezhen suddenly licked his lips nervously. What if there is no broadcast at all? Haha, Subai smiled, then you still have to live in Shanghai for a year and you can't even afford a toilet with the money you saved. Haha, Ji Zhen also laughed, that's right. The car continued to drive towards the cemetery park, and the two people fell silent. A quarter of an hour later, the car arrived at the gate of the cemetery park. It was very deserted here, and it had obviously been cleared. Subai got out of the car first, threw the cigarette butt on the ground, and looked around. The environment was quiet. Coming during the day was a good place for people to get quiet physically and mentally. Being in front of the tombstones often made living people subconsciously think about the meaning of life. And reflect on your own life. Of course, if you come at night, those positive factors will probably not be seen, except for making people panic. A middle-aged man with a stooped figure stood waiting behind the gate. He was not very old, but he had a lot of acne on his face and an obvious hunchback, giving him the feeling of an old man. When Subai and Xiezhen came over, his back bent even deeper. Two adults. It's time to start, Xiezhen said. Good. Red threads appeared in the hands of the rickety man. As the threads twisted, a feeling of magnetic field disorder similar to last night reappeared. Subai and Xiezhen walked straight to the office. That guy is very smart, Subai said. Haha, I was a metaphysician before I became an audience. He is quite smart and easy to use. Zhen was not interested in continuing to introduce the rickety man, but looked at Subai and said, now, let's start to replace the two people last night. Let's go into its perspective. Subai nodded and took a deep breath. At this time, he regarded himself as a low-level listener who had just completed the experiencer task. Of course, it is impossible to completely forget and completely subsume it, but the current simulation is just to experience that feeling again. Subai slowly knelt down and took out the photo in his hand. In the photo, he, Sunur, Chu Zhao and the four girls were taken together. Xiezhen also squatted down at this time, looked at the photo in Subai's hand, and said, who is this girl? She is very beautiful. Why haven't I seen her before? I don't know, she wasn't there when we took the group photo before. But looking at her posture in the photo, she is obviously familiar to you, and her position is also left in the shooting perspective. It doesn't look like it was taken from P. Her hand is still on this man's shoulder. This man's the posture is also very natural, as if it is just to make it easier for her to lean on him. How could you not recognize her? Xiezhen asked. Is it possible that my memory has been erased? Subai asked. Broadcasting will not erase the memory of the listener. It will only erase some memories of ordinary people after the listener dies, allowing him to die normally in reality. Is there any chance? Subai asked a little uncertainly. Her figure appears again in the photo, which may mean that she has just died. Xiezhen guessed, if you go by the theory that the memory has been changed, the three of you bought the tombstones here. Then her tombstone should be next to it, connected with the three of you. Then go and see. When he said this, Subai suddenly opened his eyes wide, and Xiezhen on the side also held his breath at this time. The sky suddenly turned dark. How is this going? The rickety man looked at the red thread in his hand with disbelief. The red thread was running at a very fast speed. Now it was not his fingers that were driving the red thread, but the red thread that was driving his fingers. The overloaded changes in his fingers were causing blood to overflow. The rickety man was terrified, but he couldn't stop. However, if he continued, his fingers would probably be scrapped. Puff. Puff. Several fingers flew away from the palm of his hand. The rickety man knelt down on the ground slumped, but his red line continued to float in the air, shaking and changing, as if a pair of invisible hands had replaced it. He is controlling all this. Besides the photos under the tombstone, there should be something strange here. Xiezhen had already stood up and looked around. The speed of the formation has increased by more than 10 times, unless that guy just skipping the level of ordinary listeners and directly integrating the natal weapon was successful. Continue to believe, at least continue to maintain this atmosphere of drama. Subai also stood up, don't wake up, otherwise everything will disappear. Haha, it's like a ghost pressing on the bed. I woke up but couldn't move. But why did you remind me of this? Do you think I don't know? Xiezhen patted Subai's shoulder helplessly. Just because of your reminder, I feel like I'm about to get into trouble. After Zhen finished speaking, he immediately closed his eyes. The darkness around him became lighter, and a ray of light began to shine in. Subai looked at his palm. He didn't feel anything pulling on his power, but in order to maintain this feeling, he seemed to be actively giving his own power. This was a very strange feeling. Because the passage of one's own strength is not passive, but active. I kind of regret inviting a low-level audience formation master to come here. There are clearly things here that we ignored last night. Your two friends were not absorbed by the so-called formations here last night. Quite the opposite. They use their own power to maintain the operation of all this. When they are exhausted, the operation here will stop. Otherwise, they have no reason to survive without being sucked dry, because they themselves it's just energy, but they are still hurting themselves. To put it simply, Subai continued, it is impossible to strangle yourself to death. You are still concise and to the point. Ji Zhen smiled, are you trying to scare yourself? Or do you believe in something and then something will happen? Is it a situation set by using your own established thinking mode? Suner said that the power went out when she looked up the girl's information on her computer. Now that she thinks about it, it may be because she doesn't know who the girl is, so it's like a dream. It's impossible for people to appear in their dreams. Something she had never seen in reality, because Suner herself didn't know who the girl was, so when she was about to look up the information, it unexpectedly appeared. A reasonable explanation allowed her to avoid the self-unrecognition. The problem? It should be like this. Here, it's a bit like a dream, but it's not like it. It's not a situation that simply arouses people's inner fear or negative emotions, because it's not that simple and pure. Here, it's really complicated. The water is very deep. Subai turned around, looked towards the office, and took a few steps forward. The door had been reinstalled, and the darkness was getting thinner and thinner at this time. It was obvious that neither Subai nor Xie could continue. Keeping the same tone as in the previous dialogue, after all, they are much wiser than Suner and Chuzhao, and they came here after knowing the general truth. They don't believe this at all subconsciously. They have been able to maintain it until now. It can be regarded as an effect similar to self-hypnosis between two people. The silly conversation between the two before was actually to create this kind of atmosphere so that they can get into the play, but obviously this kind of atmosphere cannot last for long. Xie put his hand on Subai's shoulder, and he sighed, as if he was helpless because he hadn't found the key point yet. Subai took out a cigarette, handed another one behind him, and took the cigarette. Snapped. Subai lit up the cigarette. The darkness had become so thin that only a layer of paper was left. All of this was almost over, but he still found nothing. Could it be that he would have to do it again later? Or call the monk who is holding some kind of Buddhist conference in Nantung back quickly so we can explore together? Hey, when you bought the tombstone before, did you put any souvenirs under it? Xie asked curiously. Subai was stunned for a moment, turned sideways, and saw that Zhen was standing more than 10 meters away from him, very close to his tombstone. So, he just put his hand on his shoulder to catch his cigarette. Who is it again? For a time, the darkness instantly thickened again. Xie in the distance was surprised and praised. Oh, how did you do it? Did you put yourself into deep hypnosis again? You are such a long-lasting man.